think we should need the microphone. The sound is not.
Yeah, just use the
It's true.
Just the pre-record is a normal video. The camera video, just the
True. It's working. Is it delayed? It's working. No, it's working. It's slow.
Can you hear me? Is it clear? Is it audible? Okay then. So please, like, let's decide to ourselves. I don't get distracted. Beginning in. Let me say it like that. So beginning in 3. So before I begin, I'd like to, while I'm assessing that, I'd like to dedicate this speech to Ngozi Oluwaseun, top boys, my union, now that's going to the best championship. Was there, was easy for training me as well as Madam Beat, which also was playing a huge part in my growth up to this point, right, another finals. So, how you guys doing now? So, beginning in 3, 2, and 1. So, panel, you can never in any world discuss ideals without also discussing the kind of pragmatic impact that those ideals in themselves have. Right? Because when we talk about a support for an ideal, we cannot just support something in like the abstract setting, especially since those support, that said support, has pragmatic impacts. What it means is that for this debate to actually be a debate, we cannot just debate this debate on just what is written on paper about socialism and capitalism. Because on paper, they all have positive sides to them. And what we have to discuss is on the level of analysis, the kind of impacts that those particular stuff effectively give us, and how comes whether those impacts in themselves are positive or negative. If we're able to show you how comes the impact of an alignment is what Pan-Africanists by and large wants, like what Pan-Africanism stands for. Because we're saying an entity should generally support something, we have to consider their interest in that particular regard. Pan-Africanism basically what they generally want, their aim is basically to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between us. What this level of alignment looks like. So this level of alignment will most likely look like publishing more and more stuff from like media, looks like things like activities. Right? This is just an example. In case this guys want to come up and bring an extension of like more examples, those examples in themselves are still included. For you to validate that example, you have to show a down example is like what's called not explicit to house. But the next thing to engage is on what capitalism by and large, like what the ideas of capitalism look like. Because the ideas of capitalism will not just rest on just like what's called free markets, as they would most likely want to paint that. It also has things like state capitalism and welfarist capitalism, right? Because you have like other countries that are still welfare states, that still practice capitalism. It means that the level of welfare that they want to maintain in their own side of the house is still stuff that you can still get within an ideal capitalism, or at least a good like practice of capitalism, as you have in countries like Sweden and other countries like across those public resources, wealth distribution, and the rest of that. Like everything that you want to talk about is tied to the government, and else it cannot be socialism. What is the problem with that? And this is where we get down to the cause of the debate. The problem with that is based on the nature of African countries. African countries, for the most part, are either underdeveloped or developing. Yes, may not be all of them, but for the most part, they are that. The reason why they are that, and this is something that all of them must agree, because this is a general consensus that exists in the world. The major reason why they are that, why they are like that, is because of the government. Like the costs are generally placed back to the government. These are the government by and large that being corrupt or stuck in those particular, like they could argue about how this corruption is something that is systematic, should now tilt towards socialism. Because what it then does is that it now gives almost absolute power to that same government that is already abusing the power that they have now. The problem with that is that what you then most likely do is that you stall African development and impinge on development in Africa. Because there's no way for you to fiat that simply because Pan-Africanists are the ones pushing for this particular movement, that you have all of a sudden good governments that will all of a sudden practice a very ideal system of socialism and no longer be corrupt. You think what you get in their word is a malination of the people, Mascot, make your POI good. I continue, right? The one that fact to this particular argument looks like less people wanting to be associated. But on that very important thing that you should also note is on how comes trade and things like charity amongst countries exist also on the premise of ideologies. Yes, a country might trade with you even though you have a different ideology from them, but they are more incentivized to prioritize donating things like charity or doing things like charity and also trying to do things like trade with countries that share the same ideology as them. Most of the world, guys, practice capitalistic, have a capitalistic ideology. Countries like USA, countries like other countries in the of Europe, they might come alongside countries like Russia or China. We think of the comparative, especially talking about numbers in this particular regard. We think that the capitalist side is much more. The reason why you prioritize numbers is because when we're talking about Africa, we're not talking about just one country. Right? We're talking about a myriad of countries. So that's why we're talking about a myriad of countries. It makes sense for us to have a multiplicity of options, especially as next to people that can give us charity, but people that can effectively trade with us, even effectively alleviate our economic conditions. Especially since Africa, the way they are now, cannot be able to get emancipation just as they have, right? But extending on the first place, I was telling you about how comes people now become less likely want to be associated with Africa. The next thing to note is how comes people are now less incentivized to care. The reason why people are less incentivized to care, which is the primary thing that all of the socialists in themselves want, is because you've already gone against the progressivism of society. Before people, and this is something that is very intuitive, before people begin to care about other people, they themselves have to already have attained a certain level of comfort, right? It's the reason why people within the purview of America, they are more likely the ones that have that whole fiat to be able to give things like good social corporate responsibilities and source along those particular lines. In a world where they begin to align with socialist ideals, what you do is that people are less incentivized to care. Why? Because they have more proximate desires as opposed to wanting to go and care for that poor. They are still suffering from things like high level of poverty, still suffering from things like high level of unemployment, still suffering from things like high level of crime rates and stuff that exist in this particular regard. So the extent of these things have not yet been solved. It's because it's hard for them to effectively do that. The reason why capitalism is better, and this is the counterfactual, right, is because you give power to the common man to be able to fight for his own self. The reason why this is very, very good and this is why this is very, very much better than their own world is because at least in our own world, the poor man and the average man has control of his own fate, right? So it means that if I work hard as an average individual, I'm at least able to emancipate. I may not become a Bill Gates of tomorrow, but I'm at least able to get a much better level than I was before. That is not something that they have in their world. In their world, power is based on a government that is corrupt, and that is something that is very, very bad. But even if these guys care, I've already told you how they don't even have the wherewithal to cause change. So even if I care about my neighbor, I don't even have the wherewithal, I don't have the money to be able to bring him out of poverty. I don't even have the money or the wherewithal to be able to do anything for him, especially since I myself am poor. But they have to defend in their own side of the world. So that comes by simply tilting towards a socialist idea that are very, very able to solve corruption, crime, and corruption.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Guys, please, if you need to leave the hall, please wait until this time is done for you, because the movement and the open the door is distracting due to the fact that we don't have the sound system. That said, we have opposition to set the course of opposition in today's debate. Here.
Debate tradition I have to talk about. This speech is dedicated to top boys. All right.
Guys, other houses. What's that?
Opening government ends their speech by talking about how socialism does not create the delta to be able to do things like fight corruption. And that's exactly why they use the debate. Because this debate is about the specific Pan-Africanist movement and what is in their best interest, and not about entirely extricating all of the multiple contextual issues that exist in Africa. I'm going to do two things in this speech. But first, I'm going to show you why their arguments can work with different things that is not this. First is that they tell you that, oh, there are multiple ideal forms of capitalism that do not have all of the exploitation, like welfarist capitalism, and the debate should happen on the spectrum of those very ideal forms of capitalism. But go on to tell you that, oh, the model of socialism that is going to happen in our world is going to be one that is going to be controlled by the government, who are corrupt and are not going to exist in an ideal spectrum. That's the inherent contradiction. Now, the more important thing they tell you is, oh, there is need for some sort of intersection between other countries of the world who are predominantly capitalist and those kinds of things. But all of this does interrogate the idea of the Pan-Africanist movement and what it is they truly want to do. The most important thing for the Pan-Africanist movement at this point in time, before all of their arguments on Delta begin to even take shape, is the idea of proselytizing their ideology to make it mainstream. It's only after it has become mainstream that all of these arguments on achieving Delta can even begin to make sense. There are three reasons why proselytizing the ideals or going towards the ideals of modern day capitalism is not going to be something that is going to do that for the Pan-Africanist movement, because what they want is to be able to make people believe in their ideals. The first reason is that the model of capitalism that a predominant part of Africa knows is the one that sends them to work for 80 hours a week, paying them chicken change and those kinds of things. It means that most of Africa is not exposed to all of these Scandinavian or whatever it's called, forms of capitalism. But why is it antithetical to their ideals? The first is that capitalism, at the very core, prioritizes profit over the needs and well-being of the masses. It means that this firstly does not align with the goals of Pan-Africanists to uplift and empower marginalized communities. Under the capitalist movement, the needs and well-being of the masses are secondary to the goal of maximizing profit for the owners of capital. Secondary is the key word here. Even if they do any bit of charity, that is not it's not they're primarily the goal. That's what Pan-Africanists want. On the other hand, what we want as Pan-Africanists is to be able to primarily control the interest of the community, trying to achieve that sort of communal solidarity, communal upliftment, and those kinds of things. The second reason why capitalism will not sell and will not get the sort of proselytization that they want is because there is a historical antecedent to this, all of the bad things that capitalism has done to people of Africa. It means that to stay ideologically consistent and to try to remove all of these bad things that capitalism has done. What are these things that they have done? Things that there is a history of exploiting and oppressing marginalized groups, including people of African descent, and aligning with capitalist ideals is going to perpetuate all of these systems of oppression. Capitalism has been used to justify things like colonization, enslavement, and exploitation of people of African descent for centuries. We think that to an extent, when you now begin to align towards the same ideals, that there is a historical antecedent for this, why we are like this is because of all of these things, then you're not going to get any sort of buy-in because you're simply selling this, you're going to be considered a sellout and those kinds of things. We think that the nature of capitalism is one that inherently is antithetical to the idea of growing as a community, right? Because capitalism is one that simply is always pursuant of the best ways to make profit. It means that companies are not loyal to your country. Things like capital flight are going to become more centralized ideas. These are things that we don't want. The fourth reason is because capitalism is going to lead to a concentration of power and wealth in the hands of the small elite, which is not something that aligns the Pan-Africanist values of collective upliftment and empowerment. Under a capitalist system, the accumulation of wealth is driven by the pursuit of profit, which can lead to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the very tiny elite. Pan-Africanists, on the other hand, aim to empower and uplift marginalized communities. We think that this is something that does not sell to the masses. Why do we think that socialism is something that sells better? Three reasons. The first is that socialism prioritizes the collective ownership and control of resources. which is a better suited model of addressing the issues of economic inequality and the redistribution of wealth, which are contemporary problems of existential African communities, right? But under a socialist system, we are going to see things like resources like land, natural resources, industries and things that are owned and controlled by the community. As a response to when they tell you that governments are corrupt and all of this management is not going to happen, the thing that socialism is not about governments like discipline, but they are communities in their smaller units and things that have always worked together to be able to achieve that sort of collective prosperity that are things that are particularly important than those kinds of things. The second reason is that socialism exists to promote cooperation and community ownership, which is a way to promote the idea of self-sufficiency and self-reliance among the African people. We think that things like resources in the world are going to be better shared amongst the communities to promote cooperation and collective action. The third reason, and the reason why you must side with opening opposition in this debate, is on the idea of the difference from the status quo, right? We think that under the existential conditions that African people live in, capitalism has fucked us over badly. It means that when you now come and still continually align with those same things that people are suffering for today, because the reason people are poor is majorly because they work 8 hours for capitalist entities and never really give them like the kind of qualities that they want. We think that they are more likely to get quiet when you are coming to offer them something as a solution to what their current status quo is. We think they are better able to proselytize their ideas when you are telling them that, oh, capitalism is the reason we have all of this. So we are giving you something that changes this, that moves you closer to the prosperity, the collective upliftment that Africa wants. We think that before we can begin to argue all of the pragmatic utilities of whether or not capitalism is good or bad, or the same for socialism, we have to ask ourselves, where does Pan-Africanism in itself sow that seed to be able to be predominantly accepted amongst Africans? That is the first thing they want. It happens in our world, not in the world where you sell them to the same people who sold them as slaves, to the same people who exploited them, to the same people who are the reasons why they exist here. Why do we win this debate? We think that this debate has to objectively be evaluated from what the current realities are, from what people perceive capitalism to be in Africa, not by what it is in Denmark or wherever it is. We think that those realities mean that we think that our employers, and we are going to be easier, it's going to be easier for us to jump at an opportunity to take money from the rich and to distribute it among the poor. African people are poor. We are going to side more with you if you assure us of that communal prosperity. Vote for opening opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Now welcome Deputy Prime Minister to explain the case of OG in debate. Okay. Guys, please, this is a grand final. Ask POIs and take POIs. You can't be having the grand final without POIs. Exactly. DPM, ready when you are.
Before I start my speech, I'd like to dedicate this speech first and foremost to God Almighty and to the top guys.
Yes.
So to my baby girl, I'm starting my speech. So I get the baby girl. I'm starting my speech.
Ready for the chest and
the entirety of Raymond's speech rests on the idea that the problem or the reasons why people are poor or the reasons why Pan-Africanism has an issue is because of capitalism. We think that is false for two reasons. One, you walk to the street and you ask an average person, and the average person tells you that the problem is with government. It makes no sense if you say that you want buying and still say that you want buying from the public and still say that this same public who see government as a problem will suddenly be happy with having government have total control. We think it's something that's probably inconsistent on a principled level. Moving forward, the next thing they tell you how is like the whole Pan-Africanism idea is like the priority and the well-being of individuals is something that they prioritize in their work. Like I've already shown you, governments within states have a propaganda that surrounds them, in African states, has a propaganda that surrounds them as failures. What this means is, one, a lack of a level of trust within individuals. Two, If they ever hold control, people will not want to buy into that level of control. Understand that capitalism has served within African states as the major escapism method for individuals from failed governments. Understand that Raymond makes good money because of capitalism every month. Yeah? We think that if you are at a social level, you wouldn't be enjoying as much as you would if government, if Buhari was the one sharing wealth to him. Moving forward, next thing we tell you is like the fact that people oppose this idea is something I've already spoken to you about because of the greatest escapism that you get from them. Next thing we tell you is, we tell you how like it creates a more likelihood for people to even get away from failed states and failed governments with these, ideas. Things like people like leaving the country to work in companies abroad. Things like people setting up startups are things that are stemmed off from capitalism. We know how much startups meant in 2021 and 2022 alone. Why was this possible? Because of things like capitalism. Socialism stifles that in its entirety. What it means is that the likelihood of us to have things like Fiverr working, things like Upwork working, things like Tatcoin and all those things will be largely impossible in their world. Moving on, this shows that the Pan-Africanism, the solidarity that Pan-Africanism preaches for will not be able to happen. Moving forward, next thing you get from us on side opening government is this. We think the most important thing here is the idea of like the benefits that you get from this thing. The need for Pan-Africanism to work, there's a need for an international buy-in and an international structure. Why is this really important for us to have solidarity within ourselves? One is because the influence of that, that acceptance within individuals. I'll still show you why Africans themselves will not even still buy in the first place. I'll take you. So understand this. First of all, it gives international support on what ground? Because a lot of nations, progressive nations, are already practicing capitalism in the first place. What this means is the likelihood that these guys will support you and give you an enabling environment for you to prosper is true. There has to be a concession in this house that the Pan-Africanism that they seek for is something that they cannot get because virtually everybody within Africa is largely poor and cannot self-sustain. It means that things like China loans will still be a reoccurrence within these states. We think when you share wealth, you automatically do not push off that influence from abroad. But what they do in their world, if they begin to push for socialism, is that they take away that level of buying that we get from international spaces. I will show you why that's really very important in this speech here. Moving on, we think that there's a need for us to stir the idea of strength. There is a global demonization of socialism. Why? Because it's the fact that it has actually failed. Next thing is because it makes it it's actually a very difficult situation for individuals to spring off and become like white horses or unicorns. We think that the likelihood for individuals to progress and be exceptional is very less in their world. That demonization is bad for the image of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because it becomes difficult for us to associate ourselves with an already demonized ideology. Moving on, we think it is something that is largely, that socialism is something that has been largely misunderstood to promote things like entitlement, laziness, and a general lack of productivity. We think that's something we do not want to associate with as Pan-African individuals. Moving forward, the impact of these arguments is important to note. Capitalism is something that will continuously fight back. It means that even if you identify with socialism, it does not mean that the presence of capitalism automatically disappears. It means that you continue to fight back. Why this means is, it is necessary for us to now buy into this ideology. Why? Because the Pan-African movement cannot necessarily weigh against the powers of capitalism. That is why it's not necessary for you to buy in with these guys in the first place. Moving on the characterization of what buying necessarily is important and what it looks like. One, we think that Pan-Africans cannot fight the propaganda that I've already spoken about, that the propaganda engines who have the capital and the Western media to influence average individuals. What this looks like, the average individuals feels that government has failed and that government is not the best person to share your wealth, and that socialism most likely will not favor them. We think that Pan-Africans cannot fight that ideology. So we think that that indoctrination that already exists is something that we cannot solve. These guys do, and it's something we cannot solve. And there is no obligation on site and there's no obligation for Pan-African movement to actually solve that indoctrination of the fact that socialism is bad. All has to show us why it's important for us to solve that indoctrination or clear that indoctrination in the first place. Moving on, we tell you how next thing we tell you is how first and foremost, rich Africans and diasporans first and foremost who have benefited largely from capitalism most likely will not most likely will not even buy into your ideas in the first place. Why? They will most likely not be willing to even give us their wealth and allow you to share wealth in the first place. It means you lose out from buying from individuals who are supposed to fund your movement, individuals who are supposed to be the backing of your movement. What this necessarily means is these guys are going to fight you back, like I already said earlier in my speech, that capitalism will continue to fight you back in and of itself. It means that your Pan-African structure is something you never really actualize. Because what is Pan-Africanism? The collective like solidarity, the collective like followership for Pan-African ideas. Moving on, the next impact you get on that is the fact that governments who are made up of richer persons anyways, are directly paid and influenced by rich persons, will always defend the ideology of capitalism. What this means is, if you even want to say that government will automatically say, okay, let's share this wealth, we think that certain governments will still say, fuck it, no. Why? Because capitalism has still benefited them in the long run. Moving forward, we tell you also that it puts them in a worse position because they know that the general world aligns with capitalism and they do not want to spend more on things like welfare and whatever, so it presents a direct incentive to be very much against the Pan-African movement. Next thing we tell you is that any conversations about moral consistency are somewhat external.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister. Please, you're still not keeping your rights. What's happening?
After them, none of them passed.
No, but your government didn't say when it was happening, you're not happening. Hello. Thank you very much.
Okay, so everybody dedicated their speech to their girlfriend, so I'm dedicated to my own self. Yeah, so I think it's a promise I made. The reason I'm dedicated to my own self is because it's a promise I made to myself, and I feel it. Thank you. So the last time I came to So the last time I came to Lagos for LODU, I was here for the finals and it was very, very awesome, the environment and everything. So I promised myself that next time I'm coming to Lagos for a debate tournament in a place like this, I will be in the finals. So yeah, it's me in the finals. So sure. Sorry, my time is second. Can I start?
Please open the door. Are you coming in my way house? Please come in and shut the door, please. I'll go on my phone door.
You think you are being
Please, you need just shut. Hello.
Sure. Let's go. Panel, 60 years after most Africans' independence, in 1963, in Addis Ababa, African today is still called the third world country. We think it becomes very important for us to interrogate what is the main problem why Africa, 60 years after independence, these guys are still underdeveloped. One of those problems is, after our independence, when things like Pan-Africanist movement started pushing for African independence, both political, economic, and social independence, we think one of our biggest problems was we started competing under a system that has been built by Western world for over the years. After our independence, these guys moved into capitalism to compete with USA, UK, etc. These guys have built these particular systems for over years. We want to compete with those particular guys. It now goes against even the idea of why Pan-Africanism started in the first place, because we think Pan-Africanism started with the idea of African liberation, both mental liberation, economic liberation, and financial liberation from this Western world. We think in those instances where Pan-Africanism still keep on pursuing things like capitalism, they are not fulfilling all of those burdens where we need to liberate from these particular guys. what I'm going to show in my speech is two things why socialism is the best for modern day Africa. I'm going to engage what you get from OG, and I'm going to show you why Raymond's speech is not the best speech we can get in today's debate. Two things are going to get from me: why it increases our regional and global dominance. Second argumentation, why it places more accountability on the government. These guys are saying the problem is the government. I'm going to tell them why capitalism even makes government to become even more of the problem in those instances, and we win this debate from OO. When I understand first argumentation on how it gives us more regional power, understand that the idea of Africa being seen as a third world country, right, simply means that most African countries don't relate with itself as brothers. They see other African countries as competitors who they need to beat in the market. When they start seeing themselves as competitors, what it does is three things. One, it simply means Western power can have it easy to infiltrate those particular guys and use even those countries to fight against those particular countries to still make sure that they have those kind of dominance that they have in Africa. Which is the reason why, till up to today, you still come to Africa, you have places like Congo, it is still suffering from maltreatment by these Western guys. Why? Because most of the countries like Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, etc., they would have helped these guys come out from those underdevelopments and still seeing them as competitors who they need to beat in the market. We think this is one of the problems of being African nations from even succeeding. We think in the idea that Pan-Africanism, even when people like Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, etc., wrote a book on why socialism is the best for us, that idea of brotherhood, that Africa we share the same culture, we share the same identity, simply means that everything that capitalism has is antithetical to whatever socialism stands for in today's debate. Why is this particular limitation very, very important? Three impacts you get from how it creates our regional dominance. One, it simply means Africa can relate with other people on one voice. Why is that simply because very, very important is when these particular countries come together, Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, etc., come together to speak, have the same kind of ideology, another kind of capitalism, and have this socialism ideology which is based on communalism or community relationship. It simply means we can relate with all the Western countries on one voice. What it does is three impacts. It increases the bargaining powers of what African states can have to even engage the Western world in the first place. It simply means countries like even Congo can now say no to UK when UK is pushing any policy you don't like in those instances. Even if they say, well, it becomes very easy for them to defeat all of those particular African countries. You say for shame, we still take off all of those kind of things because what it does is that kind of community and that strength it gives us is something that is very, very important. But not most important is it increases the local productivity and local markets Africa have. Why is this particular limitation very, very important? But understand, after colonialism, right, when Western people were living, the reason why we still have problem is some of those industries these guys use, they didn't give us access to manage those industries or to control some of those particular industries. What it means is when these guys left, those industries, we can't control them. Even in the local market, we can't even compete with them in the local market. That's how come when you reach in Nigeria, some of the best things that you can see is things like Amazon and all sorts of bigger companies that we have. We think when they have this like socialism, it simply means we can prioritize other local markets, we can prioritize your brothers and not see a particular company from other African states as a problem. The reason why you have things like xenophobia and have Ghana attacking Nigeria in Ghana is because the near still have Nigerians as their biggest problem. They still see Nigerians as an enemy. In those instances when you push those ideologies of socialism, it simply means these guys now start seeing us as brothers. It simply means things like ShopRite wouldn't have been bought in Lagos. Where some people in Nigeria feel like ShopRite is being owned by South African and they're one of the biggest problems why Nigerian industries are not developing. We think in those instances, you increase the amount of local markets that these guys have and increase the kind of bargaining power that they have. Before my next argument,
two things. You talk about help among nations that are underdeveloped. How can developing nation help developing nation by and large? But the next thing to talk about is outcomes like
see that comparative advantage takes over that. Ghana produces cocoa, Nigeria produces crude oil. If Ghana is lesser in power, they can use their cocoa and give to Nigeria. Nigeria use their crude oil and give to them. Comparative advantage to this is what can even make countries like Congo that have lithium, right, that is used in producing the mobile phone, etc. They can give it to Nigeria, they can tell all those things. It even increases the amount of comparative theory they have. Last and most important argumentation is it places huge burden of accountability on government. The reason why governments can shy away from their problem in Nigeria is because Buhari will tell you they have privatized the healthcare system to those particular people. Go and pay the doctors huge amount of money. If they treat you or they don't treat you, no problem. When it simply means these guys shy away from their responsibility. In instances where we preach things like socialism or more power to government, it simply means if Nigeria is bad, we know that the only people that we can hold accountable is the government. There is no private industry, they can hold accountable. In those instances, it's even culpability can be in the government. What it just tells you from the argument you see, there's and other countries are going to backlash Africa, they're not going to take Africa. You don't think that is true. What it does is, don't you think international relationship is people engage with you based on the amount of power you have. If African countries have much more power, those Western world they say is good to the sellers, will still come to us. That is how come, even when things like USA see Saudi Arabia as very authentic to their ideologies, they will still go to Saudi Arabia to take oil. Because of why? They need Saudi Arabia's oil. In as much as Saudi Arabia is a conservative Muslim state, they don't even care. What they care is they need to survive. So if these guys say now, if we move to socialism, what the capitalists will us, we don't think that is true. When you increase your bargaining power, you increase how these guys are going to relate with you. What have we shown you for opening opposition in today's debate? We have shown you how Pan-Africanism started because we want to erase every mental slavery that have been engaged in us by these Western people. In instances where you still want to compete with them, based on the capitalistic ideology that have been built by these guys, you still remain mentally enslaved by these guys. Second thing we tell you is how it increases our regional power and global business and places huge accountability on government. Besides opening opposition.
We now welcome the member of government, what I said, government case in the case here.
Idris.
Yes, very nice.
So, Amos and Chinedu, I'm glad you guys are judging this debate because when you guys were having emotional discussion, there was a reason why you guys didn't set this debate as this house believes that capitalism or socialism is the best. She has been arguing in the opening half and pros and cons of capitalism. Clarification number one, we don't think you can tie all of Africa's problem in today's world to an exclusive idea, be it capitalism or socialism. Why? Because most African countries will tell you that they practice a mixed economic style of government and a mixed economy, like in terms of trying to mix capitalism and socialism. Hence, we can't really say this is the problem, this is the problem. As you have heard, their argument was literally a stalemate because when you look at some capitalists in Africa, they are bad. When you look at some governments, they are bad, etc. etc. What should this debate be about? Keyword, modern Pan-Africanists. Number one, we should look at how the lived experience of a modern Pan-Africanist affects the aspiration of what the African context should look like within a prospective future. So this debate should be about evaluating which idea can best fit the African context as a modern Pan-Africanist has seen it and going forward. Secondly, we need to analyze the intricate and nuanced characteristics of capitalism and socialism and how this ties in with today's African society and how the modern Pan-Africanist should impact it in his choice and sectoral making of choosing which ideal he should actually go with. Let's move to the debate proper. The existence of Africa has for long been entwined in the cages and chains that has reached our reality with a preposterous kind of surrealism that has for so long limited our capacity to stimulate ourselves with a certain type of romanticism to an extent where we can actually self-benefit ourselves and self-emancipate. Because Africa was a playground of power play between the colonial masters, slave traders, and these other white motherfuckers, they looked to suppress us by using one thing, by penetrating the main institution within African states and empowering certain groups over the other within the African context. For example, this looks like how the religious institution is so powerful that it shapes the narrative of people. This looks like how there is so much power vested in the government to an extent where the government can move away without being called into account. This looks like how some certain ethnic groups have power over some certain. These things were intentional. For example, after the Biafran War, it was an intentional policy to allow all Igbos to be stripped of their wealth and, move wealth to the northern part of the country. What this then means is that if this exists within the African structure and the modern African society, if this is our reality, it then means a modern Pan-Africanist that is aware of this history cannot in any way align with socialism. Why? Because socialism seeks to prioritize three things. Number one, socialism states that resources should be concentrated in one arm, most likely the government. But number two, socialism supports the equal redistribution of these resources. This is the most pivotal principle of socialism. But number three, socialism prioritizes communal needs. What is then the problem? In a state where there is a huge asymmetry by virtue of the foundation of the creation of the state, it then means socialism cannot achieve its goal to its optimal level. Why? Because in an instance where you say there should be equal distribution of resources in a state like Nigeria, where the northerners are already fundamentally richer than other ethnic groups, it then means that redistribution itself is a disenfranchisement of other groups, because in the fundamental formulation of the state, some were prioritized over the other, which means even if socialism is to be practiced in its most sincere intentions, it will not favor those who are the minorities that have been structurally disenfranchised from the foundation of the modern African society, which is something that is increasingly bad. Which means in our world, we do concede with open opposition that maybe the governments can be good. But what we say is that socialism, even in its best form, because of the structural disenfranchisement of African states, does not allow for minorities to self-emancipate and bridge that gap between the huge asymmetry that exists. CEO, do you have anything for me?
Let's assume that the benefits of capitalism are most likely going to exist. What is the principle upon which Pan-Africanism is built upon? And what is the principle upon which socialism is built upon? Engage that compatibility.
Sure. A modern Pan-Africanist in today's world has witnessed a huge backlog of economic development and huge disunity within the African context. The philosophy we have in Africa is that the most crucial institutions should be crested in centralized authorities, most especially institutions that push forward the state. The reason why this is increasingly bad is that a modern Pan-Africanist must have the sense to understand that there's a resource paradox that will exist within African continents, which means Africans cannot effectively transform their resources to finished goods. What this means is that we cannot continue to rest on institutions that are pivotal to the state, to be being driven by a socialist kind of economy. Why? The reason why, for example, in the United States, the reason why the United States is going increasingly in space exploration is because it's not only NASA. You have private institutions like SpaceX also exploring space exploration and are merging with the government. We need breakthrough development in terms of private ideas, in terms of personal ideas and private property, to be able to merge with the current system that we have within Africa, which is the centralized authorities, to be able to drive them forward. In your world, the reason why socialism is bad is that there is limited capacity for individual innovation to be able to merge with the centralized authorities of the state, to be able to drive the state forward through sporadic and spontaneous development. This is what Africa needs, because in the modern era, we have witnessed a backlog of misdevelopment and mismanagement. But even though we don't blame that on the central authority, we still think it's something that's crucially important.
So how is your analysis different from status quo? Because we are already pursuing capitalist system.
Like, that's the idea of the debate. You can't go with what opening said. If you say, oh, this already exists, this doesn't exist, we can't have the debate. The debate has to be about us choosing a side and showing how the benefits of that side benefits the state itself, which is exactly what I've been showing you. But lastly, this is important, guys. There is a sparring variation of needs within the African context. You have almost 1 million ethnic groups in Africa. You have 1,000 religious groups in Africa. What this means is that for there to be an aggregation of communal needs, which is what socialism seeks to achieve, there would be a flaw within the African context, because communal needs can never be truly aggregated up to its optimal form within Africa because of the variation of needs. But what you further create is an echo chamber. Why? Because if Pan-Africanism is to create a world whereby there has to be access within all African nations, socialism inhibits that access. Why? Because in the vast majority of instances, most of the problems you have within African states are stemmed from people prioritizing their communal needs. For example, the reason why xenophobia exists and all these things exist, the reason why there's huge religious polarization in Africa is because you have ethnic groups prioritizing their own needs. What socialism does is that it magnifies those communal needs and allows there to be more echo chambers within states within the African context. What capitalism will do in that instance is that the metric of development and evaluation of development does not become based on communal architectural design, but rather on individual development. So as a Yoruba person, you don't necessarily see the need to vote for a Yoruba person to be president, but rather you see the need to vote for a person who can drive more innovation that will favor capitalist ideas and the entrenchment of private property. We think this is good for the African context. Not only do we break down the increasing discrimination that we have, we promote Pan-Africanism.
Thank you, member of club. Member of club. Would like to hear from you.
I don't collect. They do exercise.
I'll put it on the floor.
You don't offer. You don't offer. Is it going to make that turn up?
I'll put it on the floor. My voice will go on the shoulder. Yeah.
Life is amazing as Alice. Lãnh đạo模式
Sorry, I lost my voice. I really can't. No. But am I able to like this? No, but oh, by the way, I don't have applications. This was the exact one when my career started 8 years ago, so I'm happy to be back. I feel very nostalgic. So I can only dedicate it to people as old as I am. ANYDC. This is where we used to sit down.
Okay. Is at any point my voice says it just cost my time.
The biggest problem you've had in the debate so far is that there has been absolutely no characterization about what the overall motive of the modern day Pan-Africanist is. Assume you are a Pan-Africanist. Your biggest enemy, first and foremost, is the Western world. That's what your biggest enemy is. Because the idea that spurs Pan-Africanism is the idea that there needs to be a liberation of the African race from the shackles of the Western world. This 30 seconds takes out Ochi because their argument is, well, we need buy-in from the West, right? That is exactly what you don't need as a Pan-Africanist. You don't want buy-in. You want to create a system that rivals the hegemony of the West. That's the reason why you need to run a system that is not controlled by the West, because the existing structures of capitalism are controlled by the West, the same people that Pan-Africanists want to liberate from Africa. The impact here, which is our first extension, is that it would be principally inconsistent for a Pan-African movement to align itself with a system that is built, bettered, and controlled by its arch enemy. That is the first analysis that you need to take note of in this instance. So on a principle level, we think that you shouldn't be aligning with that principle, because if Pan-Africanism was a religion, this is the devil in itself. Like capitalism is a devil, and I'm going to prove that to you. Notice that the nature of Pan-Africanism pre-colonialism is one that didn't have statehood. It's an Africa without statehood. What it means is that at the core, the Pan-African is anti-individual statehood. That's again why CG falls out, because CG is about maximizing interest for African states. That's not what the debate is about. The debate is about maximizing interest for the African community on a collective. So if there is a way for us to undo the menace that was done by colonialists, which was creating divisions by creating borders, the borders are what has fucked us up. By creating those borders, if there's a way for us to undo those borders, we would prefer that. So our definition of aligning with socialism from CO is that we want a socialist Africa, not a socialist Nigeria, a socialist African states. No. We're saying socialist Africa on the collective, right? So that we do not have to care about individual interests of these countries in themselves. So that we return back to how it was before there was a disruption by the Western individual. That's all the response I'm going to give to this guy, so extensions. The basic principle behind the birth of Pan-Africanism is purely aligned with socialism. Why? Because Pan-Africanism was better with the goal of uniting Africans and strengthening African borders to resist Western or external forces. The disintegration of Africa into 50-something states directly antagonizes the existence of that Pan-African system. The best case scenario of CG is that you have a successful capitalist world wherein you have big countries, let's say Nigeria, South Africa, all the examples that have happened here. The problem with that, one, is that the likes of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, who barely have anything to call a GDP in these instances, any sort of growth Nigerian level is not the kind of growth that the Pan-Africanists cares in the first instance. So even in that best case scenario, we don't care about it as a Pan-Africanists, even if they get all that benefits that accrues to these nations in these instances. Is it? No. Secondly, is that as a Pan-Africanist, right, you want to ensure that there is an idea of unification as opposed to individual identities. Listen to Idris' speech. He tells you that we need to create a world where individuals are able to maximize their full potential. Guys, a concern I'm going to make here is that as a Pan-African movement, we don't care about the highest level of economic growth. What is more important to us is the collectivization of our social identity. So even if in our world, we are a moderate, middle-income group of people, we are better off as an ideological movement as opposed to a rich, individualistic Africa, where you have a superpower Nigeria, a superpower South Africa, but you still have Benin Republic, depending on the position of tomato, to survive. We therefore think that the best thing they get is economic emancipation, but that is not the interest of the Pan-African. The interest of the Pan-African is social emancipation, the idea that there needs to be a collective identity. That identity is never going to be collectivized when competition is what drives, the system as a coaching.
You want a socialist Africa. That's not the debate. What we question is the process. How do you get big countries to buy into the distribution of their wealth? How do you get the average man to buy into what you're trying to push for? How do you
The problem is that you assume that every debate is a pragmatic debate, right? That we need to care about whether or not it works, right? We can sit here and agree that in practice, socialism hasn't really vetted, a lot of successes. But the point is that as a principle, it's like your religion as a Christian. Nobody asks you, how are we sure that heaven exists? But you believe that heaven exists, and you pursue heaven ultimately, right? We don't care whether or not this is something that is successful in itself at the end of the day. What we care about is what aligns with our own goals and our own motives at the end of it. Like I told you, the pure Pan-African is not interested in material wealth. The pure Pan-African is interested in the wealth of the mind, the idea that people see themselves as a collective. Notice that Pan-Africanism has existed for so long. The reason why the ancient day Pan-Africanism did not succeed is that there was an attempt to try and merge Pan-Africanism with capitalism. The likes of Kwame Nkrumah and Gaddafi and the likes of them believe that you can have Libya and Nigeria coexisting as independent states but succeed as Africa. It has never worked because there is a duty on the state to prioritize itself first and foremost. As a president, your duty is to Nigerians, not to Africa. When you as a Pan-African dismantle the idea of statehood within Africa, you are able to create that collective society that you want. Why does their side harm Africa? The only thing that aids the West is taking over African countries by creating divisions among African countries. In our world, and this is what the counterfactual looks like, in their side, you have Nigeria, South Africa, and all of these countries struggling for Belt and Road Initiative and aids from the West. On our side, any investment that wants to come in must come into Africa as a collective, not to these individual states. That way, you have an egalitarian growth. Even if it is stunted long-term growth, we say by ideology, it is the kind of growth that we want, and we are contented with it, as opposed to the overbloated growth that thrive on individuality. Happy to see you.
Yeah. Thank you, member of COP. Welcome the people of government to any case of the government bench in the debate. Here.
Go take time for me to buy. On your spot. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Modulus.
Fair enough. I'd like to dedicate this speech to Sadiq, who was supposed to be my partner for this tournament, and also dedicate this speech to Idris, who decided to be my partner after the unfortunate incident that happened for our And I also want to dedicate this speech to all your ANYDC members and my group. So let's go. This debate ought to be judged on what side are you able to generate impact as the modern Pan-Africanist. We don't think this debate is about the definition of Pan-Africanism in 1950 or 1960. It's dependent on how the individual views the world and views Pan-Africanism and how it intersects. The first thing we're going to talk about is opening government. Because what opening government tells you is that the reason why socialism is bad is because African states are corrupt. The reason why we beat them are two reasons of that premise. One, Idris explains to you why that system of corruption exists due to the fact that colonialism is the systemic reason for that corruption, which means that we are told them. But also in terms of impact, Idris addresses why the system of colonialism does not just interact with the state, but also interact with things like ethnicity and also interact with things like religion. For example, those enforced communal ideas in this instance, which means our impacts are larger than theirs. But also, I think in terms of why it changes, which opening government is never able to prove, Idris explains in this extension why the narrative of capitalism generates more societal cohesion to the extent where people are able to vote out those bad governments inherently beat opening government. But we think that closing opposition makes a very closing opposition lies when they tell you that Pan-Africanism at the end of the day does not just want African growth, like it just wants Africans to come together and say we like each other. We don't think that that's essentially what Pan-Africanism looks like. But then I'm going to talk about opening opposition next. What opening opposition wants is buy-in for Pan-Africanism. And here's what they say. What they tell you is that to a very large extent, people are not going to buy in because capitalism capitalism fucked up their lives. We think that that's largely untrue. I think OG responds by saying like rich Africans are not going to buy in. But then if they do concede that capitalism is intertwined with the life of everyday African, and it provides and caters for their sustenance, because the socialist state is unable to do so, as Idris points out to you in extension, it means that on our side we are able to generate more buy-in to the extent where we are able to talk about a narrative that individuals are able to buy into. So individuals believing that capitalism is able to cater for them and having a movement that advocates that they can be part of that system, not just supplicants of that system, means that they are able to now opt in and buy into Pan-Africanism to a very large extent. But the second reason why people can never buy into socialism on their side is because it reduces their access to things like social credit, like credit, for example, to be able to expand their business. That's the same idea of socialism. It reduces the ability for you to be able to have access to things like capital within that particular market, which means that you can never buy into the movement on the outside. I think opening, the first speaker in Obo is out. But then I think what Justice Spence's speech talking about is why, to a certain extent, it enforces competition amongst Africans. I think Idris' extension directly flips this argument by providing why capitalism ultimately preaches the idea of cooperation, because that's the only way you can come together and say you have a collective goal to achieve. But also, secondly, we think that even if under status quo, capitalism is oppressive. Our side, and the way in which the modern Pan-Africans advocate for capitalism or alliance for capitalism, is that Africans can be a part of this system and can benefit massively from this system, which means that you are able to generate more buy-in to this extent. Let's respond to closing up. What closing up says, and I think ASM is a very funny case that never really justifies, which is that we should just destroy statehood by capitalism. Note that the extension that comes out of AZ never proves feasibility on their side, which is why you get their impact at the end of the day, which is how are you able to break down the collective identity of individuals and generate a cohesive one? Why? But secondly, they never prove how all African states are able to generate that massive benefit from their side and why that asymmetry no longer exists. But the first thing I'm going to do within this debate is deal with the form of funny characterization that comes out of that speech. But as it says, to an extent, the modern Pan-Africanists largely care about blackness, and that's what they all, that's what they care about. They don't care about economic growth. Idris' extension explains clearly why this is not the case, because not that Eze asserts that this is true. Idris explained, as a modern Pan-Africanist, you have seen the world, you have seen every system, you have been able to explore why your system is not working and why other systems have worked, which means that you are not the same as Muammar Gaddafi identity. The reason why things like the AFCTA are non-workable under status quo is because of the fact that a whole lot of African states have competing interests with each other due to the kind of identities that they have. The only way to break that down is capitalism and showing them that all of these AFCTA can actually bring benefit to one another. Note that xenophobia is then much more likely on up than it is on our side. But also, the kind of voting mechanisms that we're able to create, the only incentive for you to vote out bad government exists on our side. Because on their side of the prioritization of individual identity, you're much more likely to vote for individuals that are proximate to that identity. But more so, not going to vote on the basis of things like growth or utility at the end of the day. But within things like the African Union, for example, we are also going to vote on the basis of those identities. We radically change that on our side because capitalism gives people the incentive to collaborate, but it might be happy to win.
All right. People of the please come around to the debates.
Raymond, because I think I'll use him to represent top boys. I think specifically he's been awesome so far, and not everyone knows how far.
The top boy.
I would also dedicate this to Mariano KG.
Wala.
How have you been now?
The last set of people I'm going to dedicate this speech to all new debaters that are trying to so
Take the right boss.
I'll definitely take the right.
Why is this man and this man?
All right. So the very first problem with closing government, and this is so terrible that Modus had to do this, there were a lot of strawman. This debate is not a pragmatic debate at its core, because if we want capitalism or socialism, we can agree by deducing certain facts that they can succeed on either side. At the core of this debate, we need to interrogate the principle upon which modern-day Pan-Africanist ideologies are built upon. Then you interrogate it with capitalist ideals, socialist ideals, and try to weigh it up to see which is better, right? The very principle upon which Pan-Africanism is built is the collectivization of Africans to grow internally within themselves, even though that can cost them a lot of economic impact. I think Pan-Africanism is okay to tread that level as long as it can unite Africans and oppose that very external enemy that we have, which happens to be the West. The very first thing I'm going to do is to re-establish our extensions, right, and show you why we differ from our opening. Opening opposition proves why capitalism might not sell, right? That's the only thing. And this is the problem with the opening half. The opening half made the debate a conversation about socialism versus capitalism. From closing opposition, we think capitalism can work. It's possible. Socialism might be able to work. The idea is at the core, what is going to be the best interest of the Pan-Africanists? And that is what we think the debate should be more about. What we prove better is that even if we take government bench at their best and we say capitalism might sell, we still show you that socialism would be better because it can unify Africans considering the compatibility with identity. Why is this important? Because first of all, the philosophy upon which socialism is built upon is like getting collective benefits and the like of them. This is what happens here. One, it means that we are more likely not going to spend so much time convincing people to join the Pan-Africanist movement, because the movement is built upon the idea and principle of socialism, which is to unify people. That is a direct opposite of what capitalism is built upon. Because for you to convince someone to join the Pan-Africanist movement, you need to explain to him why a Pan-Africanist state is practicing capitalist idea. It is counterintuitive in and of itself. So it means that we are more likely going to have more buy-ins on our side when you trade on that particular line in itself. But secondly, it means that we have more time and resources to make things better for the Pan-Africanists. Thirdly, it means that we are less likely going to have factions in the Pan-Africanist movement in themselves, because we have proven that that compatibility in itself sustains the very premise upon which Pan-Africanism in and of itself is built upon. But second thing is that there now needs to exist a core confirmation bias, which is what we have socialized ourselves as Africans to look like. So it means we are more likely going to get buy-ins on our side. Opening opposition does not tell you this, and we think we extend better on that. The second thing you need to talk about is the worst-case scenario. Let's take them as their best, right? Because they say, let's assume we pursue whichever side, right? Because closing government says we need to innovate, we need to boost individual innovation. That's the best way we can grow. The worst case analysis is that we fail. Why is this better? One, let's look at socialism. If we fail in the long run, it means that we have less backlash internally, because the people that are members of this movement understand that the very premise upon which Pan-Africanism is built is not a foreign idea, but a socialist idea that justifies collectivization. The flip is capitalism, right? Because they know that capitalism is a foreign idea, because these guys agree that the very reason why we are wars, the very reason why we are bad, colonization, all these things were premises of capitalism. So it is a clearly like Western ideology, like it's foreign in and of itself. It means that there is less threat to the Pan-African movement and there is more sustainable approach for it. So it means in long run, we are more likely going to make things sustainable for our side, because capitalism in and of itself has proven to be the enemy of Africans. What this means on the long run is that when you weigh up the benefits you are more likely going to get on their side, it means that they are very, very minimal, especially considering that the debate needs to interrogate in principle which one is better for us to pursue or which will be in the best interest, right? The second thing is it tells you is that in the past, capitalism failed for African states because ancient day Pan-Africanists tried to integrate it because they felt that would be how we would better our lives in and of themselves. But at the end of the day, this failed over time. So this is even to tell you that we cannot agree with them that capitalism that they say will be better, even if pragmatically is more likely going to unify the African identity, which is the core upon which Pan-Africanism is built upon. But thirdly, is that it's going to harm Africa the most, because it means that we are aiding the West divide us more, because we are trying to pursue a Western ideology that is going to be premised on individual profit. We don't think we have a problem with each side that we are most likely going to prioritize. We need to look at what is better in the interest of the Pan-African ideology.
The base of your case is built on the fact that competition cannot lead to collaboration. But competition does not mean collaboration is not possible. Europe is unified despite being capitalistic. Engage outcomes despite the fact that China is socialistic. It does not necessarily lead to a unification of Asia.
Listen, socialism at its core is not anti-profit. Socialism at its core says that profit should be redistributed to everybody. That's that. The last thing we are going to talk about is to weigh up the closing half, right? Because closing government tries to be smart. The problem is that what these guys tell you is that we need to pursue individual growth for us to succeed. There are two reasons why this is bad. One, for you to have benefits of capitalist ideas, competition needs to exist. Why? When competition exists, one party is not likely going to try to find different mechanisms to sustain themselves and become better. And that is why we are so fucked. And that is why we are living the way we do. We think at the end of the day, there are two things that we must question at the end of the day. The very core upon which the Pan-Africanist ideology is built upon. These guys might have a lot of analysis on why that might be better, but as long as it does not align with it, we don't think that this is something we should buy at the end of the day, right? Lastly, and very importantly, this is not a pragmatic debate. This is a debate that needs us to interrogate what is in the best interest of the Pan-Africanist movement. Even if capitalism can solve whatever problems you say we do, we say fuck it. It is not compatible with ideas.
Thank you guys so very much. And thank you eventually then reconvene the debate.
Raymond. Yeah. Oh. Might just press the X button, Abby.